So thank you so much, and good morning to everybody on the call. Today, what we're doing is talking about really reimagining work and how we're going to get there and how we're going to lead and how we're going to create a healthy work environment now that so much has changed. So certainly take a minute to just acknowledge how much has changed in the last 2 years. It has been unprecedented. We can't, really reflect and look back and be like, last time there was a global pandemic in this age. So as we go through, if you have questions, and I'm going to be talking about some of the science, but of course the science is emerging. So feel free to ask the questions. I will either do my best to answer or I'll seek out the answer to respond in the follow-up email. As I go through, I'll be talking about a few different resources. Happy to share in the chat afterwards the links to those resources or in the follow-up email to this session. If you would like additional resources or there's any tools or tricks that you are curious about, please just let me know. So as mentioned, what I do within my company is really look at what we can do for proactive mental health and performance. And the truth is it goes well beyond the individual. It's about the systems in which we design, the culture in which we create, and really looking at the physical and social environment. What has changed over the pandemic is the physical and social environment. So much of what we do is based on the cues that we get from the people around us and from our physical environment. So you can imagine there's been a lot of change on how we're cued for our habits, on our behaviors, and certainly within our mental health in that space. What has happened to our brains over COVID-19 over the last, what has it been now? 7 years, the last 19, 20 months, is that there's been so much rapid change and then extreme monotony, and then influxing between those two. And now we do serve really well when there is a balance between the two, but there seems to be too much change and too much monotony. There's also grief, loss, stress. And of course, we're being sucked into that social media, what's happening in the world, and there's always something. Now, this was true before the pandemic, but just incredibly relevant to mention right now. Our attention is our currency. It's what we pay in exchange for our job, to our spouses, to our loved ones, to our relationships, to our kids, to our passion, to ourselves. And yet we don't often get taught how to manage that attention. And now we have so many things pulling at it. Social media and media, traditional media, all have people with the same designation I have that are trying to monitor and capture your attention and hold it for as long as possible. That's how they get paid by advertising. So if we're not conscious of where this attention is going and how we're managing it, that can really be part of the stressors and the stressors that have been affected over the pandemic. So do you know where your attention is going? Can you practice focusing and being really conscious about your day design, work design? We'll talk about that. How you're investing in your people, the conversations that you're having, and certainly how you're investing your time. So it was interesting at the beginning of the pandemic, with everybody kind of being forced to work at home, depending on your context, we had more time than ever, but it really didn't feel that way. And it's because we are used to things being designed within our day that now we can design. So we have heard this buzzword a lot about resilience, personal resilience, mental strength, but also business and career resilience. This has been defined as how quickly can you get up after you fall. I challenge this definition to be a little bit different. How can you face a challenge, adequately recover, strategize or re-strategize, and then act? Why this is important is this recovery phase. When we think of, I'll talk about physiological stressors, but certainly this is true in emotional and a mental state as well. We have a stressor, and then we get adequate recovery, and then we're hit with another stressor and adequate recovery. And that's fine. Stress is actually a really good thing. It gets us moving towards deadlines, it gets us acting, it gets us moving. However, that's not usually how the world hits. You'll see with chronic stress, you're not able to come down to that homeostasis or that normal. You're not able to get that adequate recovery between bouts of stress. I asked parents at the beginning of the pandemic how they were getting a break when the kids were all at home with no school and no online school yet. The response was actually long bathroom breaks, which I did not know was an option. But this context of being always on. And this is one of the risks with a hybrid or a virtual world, is that you're not getting that adequate recovery. To be fair, it's a risk within office work as well. But this is why I'm taking the beginning of this session to talk about adequate recovery, is we're not usually taught how to do it. And as leaders and as people that own businesses or have influence over a group of people in which you're part of at your business, this is so important to model, but then also provide space and encouragement and systems to allow other people to have adequate recovery. You've probably seen a lot of articles about 4-day work weeks, different way of reimagining work. Some of the questions that were proposed for this session were, how do you manage this? It's no longer a 9 to 5. And so we can talk more about that from a logistics perspective. But what I really want to encourage is this thought, this perception, this concept of adequate recovery. We as humans do not respond well to change. And what I mean by that is when habits are disrupted. If you question this, just think about how much it stresses everybody else out if you change your seat at your dinner table. Everybody else gets really stressed out, even though there's enough seats for everyone. So while we're adaptable and we can be agile, this requires practice. When habits are disrupted, you can see this disruption and causing stress. When I talked about during COVID, we had more rapid change, stress, grief, loss, all these different factors. Our body doesn't differentiate. It actually receives it all as stress. So you're probably carrying around too much of a mental load even before the pandemic. And then during it and trying to sustain it has been incredibly challenging. So how do you get adequate recovery? Now, how do you get adequate recovery when you don't have a lot of time? So as my bio said, just before the pandemic, I was traveling the world and I was talking to companies from all over Europe before the pandemic happened about how do you work? How do you set up your work design? How do you get adequate recovery? For 2 years pre-pandemic, I was also studying this from an academic perspective of how do we take effective breaks, probably because I was so terrible at them. So this is what their research states. One thing that is important to note is that when we think of chronic stress, that inability to recover, so if we don't have those breaks, there's a lot of different factors on how that affects us. So that short-term stress often is, we can really relate. We all experience in somewhat of the same form. It is that sweaty palms, rapid heart rate, that's dry mouth, all those physiological symptoms of being stuck in traffic or being late for something like that. We feel those pretty similarly. Chronic stress, on the other hand, is experienced very differently. So look through this list. How do you know you're carrying around too much of a mental load? And think about your teams or the people you live with and how they carry around the mental load. You look through this list and realize none of this serves us from trying to create good work, be productive, or create and experience really great relationships and other parts of life. For me, it's absolutely irritability. So it doesn't serve anybody if I'm on a really difficult budget meeting and then I go converse with my 5-year-old. Nobody wins with that. So we need to be able to separate and to get quick, adequate recovery, to separate conversations, to not bring one emotional load into the next, to not bring work home and vice versa, even when it's in the next room. So how do we do this? I did a systematic review of all breaks done during work time. And all breaks are good, okay, except one, which we'll talk about in a second, to either keep productivity the same or improve it, and keep mental health the same or improve it. So the number one reason I'm told people don't take breaks is because I have too much to do. But we know it actually improves performance, and we know that it actually keeps null or improves mental well-being. The one break that, and very important to know, we all take breaks. We're just either conscious about it or unconscious. So if you've ever picked up your phone and started scrolling through social media or something like that, watching cat videos online, reading a paragraph 2 and 3 times and not actually taking in the information, that is your brain taking a break, whether you like it or not. So why not make it conscious, deliberate, and effective? The average adult's attention is about 47 to 53 minutes. Now, I know the irony of having an hour and a half presentation talking about this, so hopefully I can capture your attention for that long. So having conscious breaks built in. So when I talk about designing your work day or work design, this is one of the first elements you should be breaking in. When and how are you taking breaks? If you are consistently in a virtual world, or if you're going to be in a hybrid world, working from home, we've seen these meetings just absolutely fall into each other, people not getting up, people moving on average 40% less than they were before the pandemic, which is terrifying because we were terrible at moving before the pandemic. So how can you work this in? I absolutely recommend shortening your meeting length to 25 or 50 minutes and building this in, as in scheduling it off in your calendar, somehow incorporating it. If you have a different work where you are client facing or you're in front of people, make sure these people get breaks, yourself or the people you manage. Even more so, they're responsible for dealing with people that are also stressed. So you want them working at their best. So effective breaks essentially fall into these three categories: connecting with yourself, connecting with nature, and connecting with others. So can you work that in? The one break that is ineffective, decreases both mental health and productivity, is social media. And I'll put traditional media in that right now too. The reason or the hypothesis for this is your corpus callosum, the part of your brain that's on during heavy decision making, mostly during work, is not effectively turned off. So you get a kind of half break with it and it's not very effective. So what does connecting with yourself mean? There's a million different ways you can do this. You can play music, you can journal, but I'm going to concentrate on two different systems here that have such a high ROI. So if